And coming back, we'll revive our motivation using the prayer on your screen. So just take a minute and reconnect. You can do in Tibetan or in English or both. So immeasurable equanimity. Samchen Tomche Niri Chadadang Rawe Tanyon Lane Nachi Marum Nepa Gyuchi Nepa Dagia Jao Data J Nupalamale Jingia Loptusum. Meditate on Tonglen, taking all the disturbing emotions of sentient beings, giving them to your self-cherishing thought, any self-centeredness, thus destroying it. So how did that exercise on identity and then meditation go for you guys? Did you have any interesting thoughts?
Well, I realized that I was really struggling with the enemy bit. It's not the first time I do this meditation. It's the first one you taught me, actually, in private when I came over to you for advice. And I realized that when I'm totally off balance with emotions, it is really difficult for me to feel compassion towards this chosen enemy. And then other times when I feel safe, I'm balanced, and it's much easier. Big difference.
Yeah, it's not as related to who they are and what they're doing as how you're feeling in your response to it. And yet when you're stuck, it feels like, I feel this way because of you. You gave me this feeling. It feels so solid, you know? And then you calm down and you realize differently. One of my teachers, Khyentse Rinpoche, Geshe Chashi Sering, he said, if you were to do only one analytical meditation, do equanimity. Yeah, and if you did it for 5 minutes every day, your life would change. Yeah, your life would change significantly, even 5 minutes. Yeah. And so when you do it in the long way or the more extended way, it gives you good material to draw from on the days that you do it in a more abbreviated way. You know, it sort of informs. So, yeah, it's interesting. Airplane. I live next to an army base. The irony. So yeah, what else occurred to you guys? If you're thinking about your work in terms of trying to bring out acceptance, tolerance, love, and compassion in both yourself and others, whether it's in your personal life or in your political life, what kind of obstacles do you feel like you keep hitting your head against? And what's a way that equanimity or identity examinations might help that, or you're not sure how they might help that? Just kind of think, where do you get stuck with the work?
I think that I find myself finding it difficult to have some humor in regards to all three of them, like even the people that I really love and the people that I'm neutral about and the people that I have aversion towards. I mean, if I look at it from a perspective, it's like, well, that's really dumb of me to think that this person is responsible for my suffering and I have nothing to do with it. But it's equally dumb to think about it from the perspective of someone that I care about. And like when we did the meditation now, I realized how, wow, I really like her because she makes me feel good.
More embarrassing.
Yeah, because I'm really proud that this person is my friend. And this is not, I mean, I'm not sure that I would be able to admit it in public, that this is why she is my friend, or that I would give like a public speech about it.
Yeah.
So, but then it's kind of like it shakes you up, and I find it hard to be more, I don't know, gentle and to laugh about it, to see the absurdity in it. I mean, I take it all really seriously with inside the equanimity meditation.
Yeah, it's interesting because you are thinking about it the right way. You know, you're seeing the absurdity of the way ignorance views things, but I wonder if you're still over-identified with your own opinions, you know, so then you blame yourself and you're taking it too much to heart that you've come to those conclusions, and then you think, oh, I'm so shallow, I think this way, oh, I'm terrible, and so you're over-identifying.
Definitely, that's probably it.
Yeah, for all of us, for all of us. And you know,
yeah, so how do you incorporate a more gentle attitude towards yourself also in the meditation? Or maybe it's just a meditation of self-compassion. Maybe it's not in the Tonglen meditation or equanimity meditation.
I mean, I think what helps all of this, whenever you are shining a light of self-awareness on yourself and you feel yourself cringe from that light of self-awareness or embarrassed about what that light shows, to look for the I. Who is it that's embarrassed? Who's embarrassed? Yeah. And it's so much easier to confront negative states of mind. It's so much easier to confront negative opinions if you're not overly identified with them. If you just give yourself a break and say, those conclusions landed here, they would land for anyone who had had my same series of experiences. You know, I'm not uniquely deficient or uniquely insightful in the sense of ownership. I'm just unique in that things landed here in this particular place, and so I'm responding in this specific way. But it's not me, it just wound up here. Understandable conclusion. It's a very understandable conclusion, and some days you have to live there in that conclusion, and that's, you know, natural and deserves a big hug. You know, absolutely all of us land there sometimes, I think. And you are just one person, and you're not just one person. You know, don't forget that everyone here has those conversations too. You're not alone. You're not carrying the whole world on your shoulders. There's so many people that are trying so hard to share and collaborate, you know, to share and collaborate. And if you're going in with this expectation of, I need to convince people, of course you're going to wear out. Of course you're going to wear out if you think you need to convince people. If you can shift it to, I have something to offer and I have something I need to hear, you know, and I will always, and I have always. If it's just much more in the flow of, my life is about sharing and listening. My life is to be the student and to be the teacher, and to be the student and to be the teacher, and always both. And whatever the topic is, if I can live in that like joy of learning, joy of connection place, then I don't feel like I need to convince anyone. I feel like I'm trying to share something, and they may or may not be receptive to it. But the point wasn't to change them or fix them. It was just to keep the conversation alive, because that shows that you're not giving up hope on humanity. You've got to pick when someone is open to the sharing and when they aren't. And maybe the openness they have is just you building your relationship with them with kindness, and not about content. You know, not about, all right, let's talk about the climate, sit down, get your notebook, here we go, facts. No, it's about, let's build a trusting and loving connection if we have to work together, or if we're in each other's lives. How do we build a healthy kind, friendly connection. And then when I drop a topic into that relationship, it has more of a chance of success. You know, so instead of like, I need to influence people, how do I build relationships? And if you build good relationships, you can talk about a lot more things. And if relationships are fragile, then you'll find a topic that will eventually divide you. Well, I mean, I'll open it to the group in a sec, but just my immediate thought is, however bad you think it is for the animals, make it worse. It's even worse than that, right? What's happening for the animals is terrible. What's happening for humanity is terrible. What's happening for all living beings is terrible. And that already existed and was true before you remembered it. But before you remembered it, it was not troubling you. So the fact of suffering is not the reason for your suffering, because the fact of suffering existed before you remembered it. So the reason that you're suffering when you are passionate about the cause isn't because people won't get on board with animal rights. There's something else. Yeah? Because if you were suffering because of suffering, you would be suffering even more. Because, you know, we're just looking through a small lens of look at how horrible animals are treated when they're in the meat industry. I mean, it's horrible and outrageous. And it's not even the tip of the iceberg of suffering of sentient beings. It's not even the beginning of the conversation. So if we needed everyone to be healthy, well, and compassionate in order to be happy and communicate, then it's just why bother? Which no doubt is under some of our thinking when we get exhausted and when we get burnt out. Why bother? But remember that a compassionate mind is holding suffering at the same time as holding potentiality. Right? So you're able to view and observe suffering while at the same time remembering that the potential for freedom exists. If you take out the potential for freedom existing, seeing suffering will just make you collapse into despair and not be able to act. But real compassion is not just seeing suffering, it's seeing potentiality. Yeah? You can change, they can change, things can change. Change is always happening. It can be positive change. You can be an instrument of that. And you are only one of countless instruments, so don't take it all on your shoulders. Yeah, so it's like, it's not your job to fix it, but it's also irresponsible to let it go completely, you know? So kind of freeing it up into, how do I observe any kind of suffering? Not just this one issue that I feel passionate about. How do I observe my own suffering? How do I observe the suffering of other people? Because there's a way to hold and view it that doesn't demoralize you, that actually makes you invigorated to do something to change, because you're remembering potential. The potential for development, the potential for joy, yeah, the potential for all these things. And so every once in a while, there has been one of those magic conversations where you were able to express your view and your friend was actually able to hear it and they adjusted a few degrees. And that is just so beautiful and exciting. And so that is a joyful thing of, I might get to be a condition that helps someone come closer to their true nature, that helps someone come closer to their own developmental processes. How wonderful it is to get to be an instrument of benefit. Yeah, and you already are, even when you don't feel effective, right? Even when you don't feel like you're making any headway and you don't feel like anyone is listening to you, you're reminding yourself of what you know to be true, which is making it stronger within you. You know, it's a little bit like if you know something and you just know it, or you know something and you have to teach. Yeah, if you have to teach it, then you really have to know it, and you have to really be in that space and examine it from a lot of angles. And so even if the students hear nothing you have to say, it's still a useful process for you. Do you know what I mean? Like, even if it's met with deaf ears, the process was useful for you, and it does plant seeds for them. It's just, I feel like you're grasping on expectations of immediate success and immediate change, which just isn't the way life is it? That's what's aggravating and demoralizing, is that, okay, some people just don't know any better. Hopefully we can educate them. But it's these ones that should know better. Those are the ones. Right.
So my
There is a correct observation and an incorrect conclusion, right? What you're observing is quite true, isn't it? I think we all agree. What you're observing is quite true. People are lazy and apathetic and get distracted by their own stuff and don't do as much as they could or should. That's a thing. And the conclusion of it gets to me, it makes me suffer, that's the place of investigation, because you can observe something and come to a completely different conclusion about it. And that's the training we have to work on, because part of society is telling us that if you're not angry or if you're not sad, that must mean that you do not care. Yeah, that's what society kind of tells us. If you're not angry, you don't care, or if you're not sad, you don't care. And that is a lie. It's actually a deeper, more profound caring to not let the fact of suffering rob you of your peace, because then you're not taking their suffering and making it about you. Their suffering is not about you, but you can do something to help alleviate it. You know, so we're up against a lot of misinformation in these movements, because our peers will, the ones who are also working in this way, will say, well, how can you be so relaxed? How can you be so peaceful? And you're like, I am actively working on being peaceful. I am actively working on being relaxed, because then I'm in the best position to have a steady conversation that might open hearts and minds. And at the very least, I haven't given the suffering of the world the power to steal my peace. I'm working very hard on being relaxed. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the crux of it, right? I think that you're mislabeling why you suffer. The fact that you suffer is completely poignant, and we're with you, you know, we're with you. But I feel like even if you knew nothing about politics, even if you knew nothing about the suffering of animals, you would still be suffering this much, because there's a habit of sadness. There's a habit of depression. And that is something that is so universal and so many of us experience on so many levels. Yeah, that your mind would find content that would rationalize your experience. If you never knew what happened to animals, then you would find something about your family to be sad about, or something about your work to be sad about. You would find something, some sort of content to make this feeling of sadness make sense to you, I think. No, you weren't sad before you found out about animals? Can you, yeah, how do other folks think about that? I'm not wanting to minimize what you're saying. I'm totally with you. It's just, what's the gateway to open it up again and to, you know, bring in some more possibilities. What do you guys think? What do you think? When you're observing suffering and then you suffer because of the suffering you observe and people's apathy about the suffering you observe, how do you maintain your equilibrium?
It seems to me like over-identifying a little bit, maybe, when you like suffer so much from the cause that you actually want to be active about. I think so. And actually, I want to take it a little bit like to the other side, at least for me, that, yeah, I care about a lot of issues. There are so many issues that I care about, and I sign petitions. But you said before, a sentence was like, strike me, like, if you're not angry enough, maybe you don't care enough. So I'm asking myself sometimes, the fact that I don't go to the streets, I don't go to rallies, but I do care, and I do sign petitions, and what does it mean? I'm not active enough. I'm just lazy, maybe. You know, like, you understand me? A little bit confused, maybe, but
because we all have different things.
I'm trying not to be over-identifying myself with. I mean, I'm trying with my own. Let's say I really care about animals rights, so I will try to be a vegetarian, maybe to give some donations to the Freedom Sanctuary and stuff. But I won't go to rallies. I won't go to the streets. What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, the thing is that everyone is working on their own personal stuff. And, you know, if someone's not caring about what you care about in the style that you think it should be cared about, it's easy to assume they don't care at all. And they could look at you from the same lens of, okay, you care so much about animals, but are you kind to your housemates? Are you good to your coworkers? Are you patient? That's what's important to them. And then here you are looking at these other beings who aren't in your life. And they could think what you emphasize is an improper emphasis. And yet they're working just as hard on nurturing what they value as you are on nurturing what you value. And I think that we can draw these comparisons about what care should look like. And then we judge each other and we undermine the movement of world peace by judging each other for the style that our activism looks like. At the same time, we have to ask ourselves, am I doing as much as I can given my current energy level, given my current resources? And, you know, it's like your own business to do that checking, and it's your own responsibility to do that checking. And to assume that what you did 10 years ago is what you should be doing now, that's, you know, that's a false comparison as well. So what is enough? What is skillful? It's a question that leave it unanswered. Leave it unanswered because we want to keep coming back to it. Is it enough? And really, what is of greatest benefit to all sentient beings is if they could free themselves from suffering and the causes of suffering, how will you help them do that if you don't know how to do that for yourself? Yeah, then anything we offer is an educated guess, but it's a guess. And it's still worth doing, and it's still worth giving energy to, but we might start to emphasize the spiritual path more and more so that we're a more effective condition. You know, think of if His Holiness says we are all one human family, those words have a lot more power and emphasis than if I say we are all one human family, or if you say we are all one human family. It sounds cliche, it sounds obvious, it sounds sure, but when He says it, He's coming from a place of profundity and development, and so the ripple effect is greater and deeper. We want our ripple effect to be greater and deeper. To do that, we need to develop ourselves. So it's not like you let go of work in the outside world, but you can de-emphasize it without guilt, because you know that when you enter back into the fray, you have more influence and effectiveness related on how much you've developed yourself. You become more efficient.
Right. Yeah, I just wonder if it's how important it is to really go to the streets and to protest, and how
you have to ask yourself. Yeah, you have to just ask yourself. Sometimes it's important and sometimes it's not, and that is very personal. And we want to support anyone who is showing activities of caring. Yeah, and not feel defensive or humiliated or full of shame if we're not doing the same things, while at the same time checking, am I not doing that out of laziness or am I not doing that out of wisdom? Only you know, and you don't need to defend yourself, but you do need self-examination. You know, you don't have to prove anything to anyone or your peers, and progressive people can be very hard on each other. You know, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough. You go to the Dharma Center and you don't have all the kinds of recycling, you only have glass, you know, and it's like, just like anyone who's trying, support them in whatever that looks like. Just support them. Yeah, without being defensive about what you are or aren't doing. That's true of activism, that's true of everything, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just, I find it that the other question, it's like the mirror side of it, about the question that was raised about the habit of depression or others, that I'd found in myself and also sometimes perhaps in others, that, you know, becoming an activist is also sometimes when we don't really want to encounter things that are within us. So we act instead of just observe and stay put. So I think it can go just either way in that matter, and I think it's in this kind of workshop about Buddhism and activism, how to be with skillful means and how to be honest with ourselves of the motivation of why we do whatever we do. Because I think that if there is depression or anxiety or whatever that is pushing us to be an activist in any kind of form, then the chances that we'll be angry when we're doing whatever we're doing, or that we'll be doing things unskillfully, is much higher, because we will be acting out of perhaps afflictive emotions, and then it only counteracts. So
Yeah. And, you know, the tricky thing is then if you've managed your anxiety and your depression and your own stuff, will you still be an activist? You know, it's like, oh, well, I feel fine then. So if the world's not fine, who cares? Kick back.
yeah,
I'm okay. You know,
but at the same time, you know,
yeah.
when Lingren Puche was here in his first visit, I think that we were wondering, so we've been to Jerusalem and then to Masada and to Akko, and eventually it just says, wow, it's the same story again and again and again, and nobody's doing anything. so you know, that needing to act in some sort of way, I think it's important. We can't see wrong deeds or things that are happening in the world and just be, I don't know, indifferent about. But
yeah, we do what we can in our sphere of influence, right? We do what we can within our sphere of influence. And if we don't get into competitive suffering or competitive politics, where we can say the thing I'm passionate about is worth being passionate about, and that does not minimize or negate anyone else's passion or history or suffering, but it's what I care about and what I have some affinity with, so I might have influence there. So, you know, it's like we might be great about animals, but not so great about the environment as a whole. We might be great about racism, but not so great about sexism. We might be great with the gay folks, but not so good with the trans folks. It's just a learning, right? It's a learning. And if you're bringing positive energy to anything, that's worth celebrating. And how to talk to our peers and our fellow activists in a way that is not shaming them for ignorance or not shaming them for emphasizing what we are not emphasizing. You know, because really we're in this together. This is our, you know, we're all in this together, and we're Vajra brothers and sisters, most of us too. So we're going to keep just bumping into each other. We might as well get along and make it more fun that way, you know? And so, yeah, very gently, very gently. Venerable, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe also it's like, you know, this habit of making an absolute aggressor and an absolute victim, and not seeing all the conditions that come together. So, of course, as a Buddhist, is kind of, you know, it's, the mind is a bit broader, because you know where the victim is coming from and where the aggressor is going to go. So it's not this absolute good, absolute bad, which helps with your anger, I think, and induces compassion for both. And I think this is it, you know, the realized beings, they have compassion for the aggressors and for the victims, and therefore try to act skillfully for both of them, not just for the one who kind of obviously suffers. And I think if one can work with that a bit, also that helps to be more open, and also to see, you know, as His Holiness says, I think he said in Nantes, when somebody was also saying, oh, it's so depressive to see all the situation in the world and all this. And then he said, well, who do you think you are? Do you think you're God, or you think you're Jesus, or you think you're Muhammad? Like, look at them. They also didn't succeed to make the world a happy place. So just relax, he said, and do whatever you can. But also, as Nif says, work with your own, you know, negative emotions. I think that's very, very important.
Absolutely. So I thought I'd round it off with just a few more access points to equanimity, and these are probably self-evident to all of you, but it's just worth kind of coming back to, because I think it just kind of gets us clicked in to the right way of thinking. So if you look down where it says remembering benefit, this one is quite provocative, because we don't want to give the other side credit for helping our development. And if there were not the other side of whatever issue it is, would we have as much opportunity for self-examination? Would we have as many openings for investigating our own belief systems unless there was someone confronting those? So if we can think of a way to see everyone as beneficial, this can be really useful. So if you look down, it says there's a way to view friends, enemies, and strangers as beneficial or otherwise through thought transformation. Now, this is very true, and how do we do that? We look at remembering projection. So the concept of friend, enemy, and stranger come from ourselves, not from the side of others, as well as concepts of you're not doing enough, or you're doing too much, or you're giving too much to this and not to that. These are our projections. We have to own them as projections. And this whole idea of things having a natural label is an exaggeration. So if we can unhook from attachment to friends by remembering, being with people who agree with us is not always a great thing. Yeah? Being with people who agree with us is not always the best thing for our development. Sometimes the best thing for our development is to be with people who don't agree with us and we don't agree with, because it makes us ask ourselves questions of why. Yeah? When we're with strangers, we might be a little bit more careful with our speech, because we can't assume what their beliefs are. So we might actually regulate our speech in a different way to really say the kind of cleanest, purest, most intentional version of our belief system, rather than the really afflicted, judgmental, how dare they rage side. And then with, you know, people we don't like, with enemies, if we sit with really, really deeply, if I did not have hardship in my life, would I have resiliency? If I had not been persecuted in some way, in some form in my life, would I have the same drive to see and dispel the suffering of others? Might have some. I'm a nice person. I was brought up well, right? But if I hadn't had some sort of hardship in my life, would I be as motivated to dispel suffering wherever I see it? Is the fact that I want to overcome suffering wherever I see it a quality that I value about myself? Absolutely, right? The fact that I want to dispel suffering is something that I treasure about my mind and something I want to cultivate in my mind. And if I hadn't had very difficult people and very traumatic experiences, that drive to dispel suffering would be coming from a different place. And the ability to see suffering in others would come from a different place. Yeah? So thank you, enemies. Right? Thank you, enemies, for showing me myself. Thank you for driving me to develop qualities and resiliences that I wouldn't otherwise. Thank you for showing me how much it hurts to be on the receiving end of afflictions. Now I'll be more careful with my afflictions. I don't want to hurt people that way. Being on the receiving end, then I know how horrible it feels to be judged. May I not judge, right? It's interesting. There's a comment that says, this reminds me of a line from Mary Oliver, The Uses of Sorrow. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to realize that this too was a gift. Exactly. And, you know, our mind doesn't want to give hard people credit for our development. Yeah, we don't want to say thank you, right? And we don't need to say thank you, except internally. Yeah, except internally. And so when we're meeting the people that don't agree with us, I don't know. Of course, they're your greatest teacher, but also from a karmic perspective, they're helping us exhaust our negative karma, finishing it. Yeah, they're helping us show us ourselves. So if we can kind of reframe everything that my friends are not inherently good for me, enemies are not inherently bad for me. Yeah, this is really key. But even just friends are not inherently good for me, that's kind of pulls you up, right? You think, actually, being surrounded by people who agree with me is nice and soothing and reassuring and useful to a point, and to another point just lets me stay where I am. Yeah, and I don't have to check anything. Yeah, under the influence of friendship, I might say or do any number of things to another party that are really harmful, but I'm sort of bolstered by their agreement. Yeah, if it was just me and the other person, I might be kinder. I might listen more deeply. But because my friends are feeding me, I might actually do more harm than good. It's not to say we don't need friends, right? We're just trying to like crack all the ideas of I need this, I can't have this good, this bad. None of that is as true as our ego makes it. We have to break it apart, or we're never going to be able to communicate in a way that facilitates progress with lasting change. Okay, so developing equanimity, this is our job, right? This is our job, whether it's personal, political, professional, whatever. If you were to say, okay, today is going to be a day where I'm going to meet with conflict, what do you think is your road into equanimity? Of all these tons of methods and tools and ideas, if you just sit with what is my road to equanimity that's resonating for me, that's working for me? Will it help to remember equality, to remember impermanence, to remember benefit, to remember projection? What's going to be my access route? Yeah, and then when we look at identity, what part of my identity do I cling on in such a way that it invites conflict? Yeah, that it invites conflict. You know, it's interesting, if we identify as a suffering group of people, it makes it very hard for us to see the suffering of other groups of people because it feels like it's negating ours. You know, sometimes it's hard to talk about other groups suffering if I'm somewhere like Israel, because you will always win with the Holocaust. You will always win the suffering competition. Yeah. And then, yeah, and exactly. And we could bring in all sorts of different points of absolute pain in different cultures over time and different histories over time, that there's an argument to be said, is there similar, more, same, whatever amount of harm that was done. But if you're clinging to, I am the wounded party, it makes it very hard to see the suffering of others. But if you say, I know what it is to be wounded, then you're reaching out and saying, oh, I see you, I see you. It's not the same as mine, but I get it. I get what it does to a culture. I get what it does to a family to have suffered in this way. I get it. You know, there's studies that are done mostly around Native American populations, where if you remove a certain percentage of adults all at the same time from a culture, then you will always have the next generation full of drug and alcohol abuse, full of domestic violence, full of child molestation. And it's what happens if you break a society. Yeah, and so then instead of thinking, oh, why can't they get their act together? Their suffering was so many hundreds of years ago. You see, this is what happens in any society that you break. Yeah, and so we can't do that anymore. We can't have stolen generations anymore. We can't be the white savior anymore. We can't do any of that BS or nonsense anymore, because we see what's happened. And so then we don't have to have competitive grief or competitive suffering groups. We can just use any example that we feel a relationship to and an affinity with as our gateway to the human condition. Do you know? Do you see how you do it with your friends even? Like if you're a bit sick and then someone is talking about their bad day, you'll say, well, sure, you've had a bad day, but I've been sick all day, you know? It's like someone else telling you about their suffering immediately triggers identification with your own. If they'll tell you about their hard family life and their family of origin issues, and you'll say, yeah, but if you had my mother, well, you know, I've won the suffering championship. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing with identification. It's not just about obvious points of identity. It's who we think we are as a suffering person. Yeah. So anyway, any questions or add-ons?
Just a small thing that helps me sometimes is when I'm overly attached to my opinions, is just remembering that I didn't always hold these opinions. There was once a time where sometimes I thought like the exact opposite, and sometimes maybe it was a little similar, but it's not the opinion, or my worldview is also always changing. So there's always a potential for others to be better in their conduct, and for me as well. Like I've gone this far, I could probably do more.
Yeah, exactly. Helps you not give up on people. Yeah, and then it can help you also not be too proud of being progressive, because you realize you learned, you know, people taught you things, you came across different things to educate yourself, you had all sorts of life experiences, and you needed every bit of that in order to come to your conclusions. And so how can you expect someone else with a different life to have come to your exact same conclusions? They seem so self-evident, as if you made them, but you know, they're all the result of experience and learning. So why have pride about being progressive, or pride or about any aspect of the whole deal? It's just like, wow, I got this far and there's so much more to learn.
Yeah, can I share a story what happened to me yesterday? Because, well, one thing, I'm like, you know, generation of your parents. Like I was 68 and quite violent, and, you know, Father Meinhof and kind of Red Army fraction, my idols. So right now, I'm living in quite a bourgeois area here, you know, guarding this apartment. So you know how it is when you walk around in robes in Europe or in, you know, in the West. So I got used to that, because I've been here like 12 years, and the people where I live, usually they know me and they know that I'm normal. I speak Swiss German and everything is okay. So yesterday, as I was coming home, somebody who met me, a guy, he made a very disrespectful gesture. But because I've worked with it, like, you know, so I smiled at him, very kind of, because that's what I do. Somebody addresses me in whatever way, I smile at him, say hello. So he smiled back. So then it was okay. I came home. But then the story started. So this whole thing about drop the story, because then it went, oh, but you know, again, it's the, you know, the old like 18-year-old, this bourgeois guy, and what, you know, only interested in profit and these kind of things, living in this rich area. No manners, no behavior, no respect. And then I started thinking, oh, it's maybe because at the moment we have all these protests or demonstrations for Black Lives Matter, also in Switzerland. So I think it creates in the, you know, real Swiss bourgeois people, I mean, that's my story. I don't know if it's true, but it creates the thing of kind of, how dare they protest, and, you know, they have a nice life, they come here. And I immediately put him into that category, that he is probably made this gesture because he's not happy with the demonstration for the marginal people. And then I thought, what are you thinking? You don't even know who he is. So I think if we don't drop these stories that continue, even though the situation is finished, and then it becomes the truth, kind of, you know, bourgeois guy, nasty, self-cherishing, la, 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 la. Next time I meet him, it's going to be terrible. So I think that's probably what, you know, what is also important with equanimity, to look at the story that our own mind is telling us about the other person, and then maybe to check, well, but you don't know him. Do you think it's really true?
Yeah. You're trying to hold multiple possibilities lightly. You know, you could be 100%. That could be exactly the case,
Yeah.
and, you know, suffering, and, you know, it's like holding open. You know.
Exactly. Yeah.
And yeah.
But then also, you know, it's this whole thing about equanimity and being treated in a certain way. I am very grateful having been in Switzerland now for 12 years, because in India, this doesn't happen because you're one out of thousands, you know, but here you really stick out. So I was forced to really work with the mind that I give permission to everybody to shout at me, to look at me the way they want me to, you know, kind of say unpleasant words without me being disturbed inside. Yeah, and I think I succeeded pretty much, so I'm pretty happy about this. But without training, you don't get there. This is the thing. But if you start training with the highest, then also it won't work.
Yeah, and if we just lived in Dharamsala and we were, you know, never confronted because we're surrounded by another thing.
Yeah.
And I think what's so difficult for us is to know that we don't know the whole story, but to act anyway. Exactly. Act anyway, knowing that we don't have the whole story, and yet being completely passive is irresponsible because it's gotten us into the mess that we're in now, societally and environmentally. You know, that what we used to think that recycling was the be all and end all and the most important thing, and now we realize that recycling itself has issues, and that sometimes you put things in the recycling and they wind up in the rubbish anyway, and then, well, you know, and you learn more, and then you adjust and think, okay, I need to reduce or I need to reuse. And it's not like all those years of having the intention to recycle were wrong. It means that you were developing your habit of caring. And now it needs to look different because the conditions are different and new information came. But having developed the habit of caring is vital, you know? And so it's like, keep ourselves out of paralysis just because we don't know everything. That's so hard for us, I think, how to act imperfectly and to know it's imperfect and do it anyway.
Exactly. Well, I was happy to see my reaction, because like 50 years ago, I would have called him asshole and, you know, whereas this, I smiled at him. So it feels less energetic to smile at him, but it does feel better.
Yep.
More peaceful. So.
Yeah. It's like, it's reassuring, right? Progress is possible. The Dharma works.
Exactly.
So I thought we'd just do a bit of a dedication together, and it's a dedication I think we all know and love. We'll do Shantideva's prayer, and so we just think whatever work we're doing internally and externally, may it go towards these aims. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds only if they want to. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and all wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world. Thanks, guys.